I just want to tidy up on the line of questioning that we had, Professor Triggs, and it's significantly important that you don't draw some inference that I have formed a view. This is part of my journey to form a view. But you almost alluded to the fact that you accept that a view has been formed by some in relation to your decision, particularly the timing of your decision to conduct the inquiry. In the break, I took a little bit of time to deal with the figures, because this goes to the, and this ought to be a final opportunity for me to ask you, and not your final, but an opportunity for you to respond again. From when your appointment commenced, the number of people in detention went up from 7,600 to 10,000 in your first year. By July, they'd gone up by, about 30%. But the children had gone up from 1,111 to 1,992. So that's not quite 100%, but a very significant increase. And by the time you call the inquiry, the number of people in detention overall is down by 43%, and the number of children is down by 50%, based on the July figure, not any other figure, based on the 12-month anniversary of your appointment. What trigger were you looking for as these numbers went up horrendously over that 12 months? What trigger were you looking for? What was in your mind as you determined when you might determine this inquiry?
There was no trigger. The reality was that I wanted to call an inquiry, and I could not call that inquiry as we approached caretaker mode. It was simply inadvisable to do so.
So what did you regard as, were you aware of the election date on the 30th of July? Was that public?
The fact that an election was imminent had been announced by the Prime Minister in, I think, about March, so we knew it was going to be very soon. And we didn't know of course we didn't know exactly when.
Sure. And tell me again why that influenced you. Why would that influence you? Why, as this independent body, beyond and above politics, why would that be of concern to you? Why wouldn't, if the need was there, why not hold the inquiry?
Because to do an inquiry that would go through a caretaker period and the possible election of a new government would be inflammatory. It would not assist the argument, especially as we wouldn't be able to report until after that new government or the existing government was returned. It would not have been a helpful thing to do during the process of that election. And may I repeat that it was not a trigger, but it was an important influence, was the growing statistic that the children were being held for unprecedentedly long periods of time. And one of the purposes of the inquiry was not to talk about the international law or the treaties, because that was the law was clear. It was to look at the mental health and physical health of the children. And we knew from existing scholarly research, medical research, that the longer the children were held, the greater the impact on their physical and mental health. So when the statistics, it became clearer and clearer from the department's own data that the children were being held for longer and longer periods, that urgency grew. So by February, we really wanted to hold the inquiry.
So if you've made your mind up sort of around July, your mind's set, well,
it was earlier than that, actually.
All right.
Anyway.
So then this concern you had in relation to the duration of the children in detention had to do with children held in detention under the previous government, not under this government. Mm-hmm. So all the triggers for your inquiry related to information or data that was available to you 100% under the previous government, nothing to do with the incoming government.
No, it was the 4 to 4.5 months of the new government that continued to hold the children that pushed that statistic up, that they were being held longer.
I'm sorry, Professor, that you need to clarify that for me, because that contradicts something that you just said.
No.
Well, let me put back to you. You'll have a chance to challenge it. I asked you, in fact, had you made your mind up to do the inquiry by the 30th of July, which was your previous testimony. You indicated it was some months before that you'd made your mind up to hold this inquiry. So you're committed to a particular course, the timing of which you choose to announce in the February, and we've heard from you on that issue. But as early as February in 2013, you've made your mind up to hold an inquiry on the basis of these lengthening detention periods of children who are in detention. No?
No. No,
right. Let's just crystallise. Had you made your mind up to hold an inquiry by the February of 2013, which is your evidence earlier?
Well, that's when I held the inquiry.
No.
When I called it.
You held the inquiry in 2014. I asked you about...
well, as early as I'd been in my position then for about 6 or 7 months. We had decided in the Commission that we would hold an inquiry as a follow-up, a 10-year follow-up of the 2004 inquiry.
Let's hold that point. So that puts your decision and that of the Commission around about the Christmas of 12-13, correct?
No, I'd say it was more like February, March. We were pretty much deciding that.
Tomato. Let's go with February. That's my favourite date. That's when I arrived here. So around about the February, you'd made your mind up to hold an inquiry. And that related, did it not? So you've made your mind up in the February. We don't have an election till the September.
But can I please explain that it was a follow-up to be in 2014, which was the 10-year anniversary of the first report.
No, but with respect...
Which was to be conducted this year.
Professor, I don't want to make this difficult. I'm truly trying to search myself to understand the due process here, and each question takes me further away from understanding that. We've now got a situation where you've indicated in your testimony before this committee that as early as the February of 2013, you had decided to hold an inquiry. Full stop. Matters continue to deteriorate. We've seen the numbers. We've accepted the numbers have gone up by 40% or something under your administration. Nothing to do with you. I'm saying the term of your administration. Yet it's another full year before you announce the inquiry after a change of government. The point I'm drawing on is if you've made your mind up in the February, then it is no longer valid to hold that an imminent election is the thing that prevents you from executing your decision to hold an inquiry. I mean, this is becoming of concern to me because before we had a proximity issue of dates, now we've got an entire year from when you have established you're going to do it until when you do it, thereby invalidating, I say, your excuse about the pending election.
Well, with respect, it's not an excuse. It was a genuine analysis of when it would be appropriate. The intention was never to hold the inquiry in 2013. The intention was to hold the inquiry in 2014, which was the 10-year anniversary of the first inquiry on that issue. I didn't want to hold or call it immediately with the new government coming into power for a very good reason, and that was that government had expressed to me that they would change the policy in some respects that were important, and therefore I thought it was at least appropriate to give the new government some months to change its policy. Actually, as a matter of fact, not on the matters that I had raised with the Minister, but I don't want to raise those discussions
So the reductions, these reductions that we talked about before, the figures you accepted, that wasn't satisfactory to you?
Well, some reductions were very welcome, and indeed all subsequent announcements of reductions are very welcome, but we still have 750 children in detention. Our growing concern by February this year, when we had intended to conduct the inquiry this year in the first place, we never intended anything different, was that the length of time was longer, but also there were other elements to this. One was that it was quite clear that none of those in detention, their claims were not being assessed, and that had been, I think, the case since August 2012. So we were becoming increasingly concerned by the fact that there appeared to be no movement at all.
Yeah, but not concerned enough.
Concerns.
Might I say, can I ask you to comment on the fact that by the February of 2013, you are concerned seriously concerned, enough to form the view that an inquiry was required. And on your own testimony, that had to do with the length, in part at least, I'm sure there were other considerations, of the length of detention of children.
That was only relevant when we knew what the length of detention was. So by February, from the departmental figures, we realised that the period of detention was growing, and that was 2014.
Yeah, but
that evidence wasn't available before that.
Other than we've got a birthday coming up and we should have an inquiry every 10 years for no reason at all, what motivated you in the February, and your commission, in the February of 2013 to firmly make the decision we'll have an inquiry? We'll forget about when you triggered it.
I didn't use the word firmly make the decision. As a matter of the sort of discussions that we have in the Commission as to how we use our resources in a focused way, we had felt that as it was clear that children were being held in detention in 2013 and the year before, of course, we felt that it would be appropriate to have a review that picked up the 10-year period. As the situation became dramatically worse, as you quite correctly point out, by the time we were clear about those numbers really escalating, we were moving straight into an election period. So I decided that we'd give a few months to see how the government would amend its or change policies of the former government, and they were not being changed, and that's when we felt that we would call the inquiry. My preference from the moment I arrived in the Commission is to always work with the departments and work with government, preferably behind the scenes, to achieve human rights outcomes.
So did you consult with the department and or the government?
Constantly, constantly. And I repeat, we were monitoring detention centres throughout this period. It wasn't as though we were doing nothing.
I hadn't finished my question, Professor.
Well, I'm taking a while to answer yours.
No, no, you were answering a question I hadn't completed, with respect. So you consulted with the department and the government of the day back in the February of 2013 about the thinking, your thinking, and the Commission's thinking about an inquiry that was going to be held a year later.
We were considering in that year, 2013, whether to hold an inquiry. And by the middle of the year, and as the numbers were going up, our thoughts that we would embark on an inquiry were becoming crystallised. Holding an inquiry is a huge resource-intensive exercise, and I have to discuss that across the Commission. It takes resources away from other commissioners, but the decision, as the numbers mounted by June, July 2013, it was clear that we had to hold the inquiry, but it was always intended to hold that inquiry for 2014.
Well, thank you for that comprehensive answer, but it was absolutely non-responsive to the question that I asked you, Professor. In the February of 2013 or thereabouts, did you consult anybody in the department about your thinking that we need to hold an inquiry 1 year from now?
I will take that on notice because I can't actually. We have and have had very close relations with the Department of Immigration, and I think it very likely that the team working in the Commission in this area will have, because we have weekly telephone meetings with them, and I and other members of the Commission meet them regularly. I would have to provide the evidence that the matter was raised, but I can't speak specifically as to when that occurred.
Okay, so. Coming back to the February, by February, I think that was your latter date, the minutes of the Commission's meetings will reflect discussions about an inquiry a year from now. No,
because we don't keep minutes of those informal meetings with the department. We talk to them, as I say, very regularly, and we certainly don't keep minutes of those discussions. Any formal minutes, people may have a file note.
The Commission convenes and meets and discusses a national inquiry, and you don't minute those discussions or people's contributions?
We don't have formal meetings with the department.
No, Mike, go back, I'm sorry. You must have headed to Broome and I was on my way to Perth. My question's related to the meetings of the Commission. Oh, absolutely. Of course we minute our meetings. Yes. And if we were to have the minutes of February 2013, or even January perhaps, we're not sure, sometime, even 4 months into your appointment, we're going to start to see reflections in those minutes of discussions about an inquiry that we're going to have and announce in 2014.
It probably would have been in the minutes somewhere around the middle of 2013.
No. Your evidence. I'm sorry, Professor Triggs. Your evidence is the Commission was discussing this at length in the February and had made a decision almost a year out. So
well, absolutely.
I'm sure it'll be there in the June, but this is starting to. This is a slippery slope in this discussion. I'm interested now.
Well, I think because you are putting a political, you're viewing this through a political prism, and we are dealing with a matter of law. I have discussions across the Commission with executive staff daily, and we discuss matters that certainly would not be minuted, but we have 6 weekly formally minuted meetings with all the commissioners, and those, I will certainly check our minutes to see at what stage we were starting to discuss it in the minutes. So, in other words, we have informal discussions in the early part of the year as to whether this is a good idea or not, but by about the middle of the year, and I'm advised now it was June.
So these discussions in the February are informal?
Oh yes, I think I was discussing it with the executive staff and also with the legal department and with those that were handling our detention centre visits as to whether it was appropriate, whether we had the resources to do it, what we were committed to and so on.
So can you give... O'Sullivan, I'll ask the Commission to check its minutes in
Please.
January and February 2013.
Please.
And if there's any reference in those minutes to this prospective inquiry, then they'll be produced to you. And if there is no reference in them, then we will provide you that answer on notice. Because
you might see where I'm going, Professor Triggs. Your earlier testimony is by the February 2013 you'd established in your mind to have an inquiry.
No, I'm afraid you're misstating that.
No, I'm happy for the Hansard.
And if it's in the Hansard, then the Hansard must be corrected, because under no circumstances was it a crystallised intent by then. It was a matter of discussion between me and 2 or 3 or 4 senior members of the Commission staff. So
let's just now, because that's certainly not the reflections that were given in the testimony, and Hansard will speak for itself. So when, by June, you've made a very important decision on this in relation to an inquiry. Did you discuss that with the department then in June, once you'd settled, I'm going to have an inquiry next February or thereabouts? Had you had a discussion with the department? Had you had a discussion with the then government?
Our records will demonstrate that. We'll have a look at the records. I'm not committing. I'm fairly sure that we did, and I'm advised that we did, but I will check our records to give you the evidence as to whether we did or not.
So, Professor Triggs, is it the case now that you have discussed an inquiry that's going to occur after a change of government with the previous government at a time when you didn't want to politicise the issue because of a pending election?
No, I'm afraid your question has slipped. We were talking about advising and discussing with the department.
No, my question was that Hansard...
Discuss this with
Trust me, Hansard will reflect my position. I was talking to you first about the department and then about the government of the day.
Well, that's not my understanding of the question. I answered the question on the basis of did you discuss it with the department?
To give you the benefit.
I certainly did not discuss that, as far as I recall, with the Minister, and I did have reasonably regular meetings with the Minister and of both governments, as a matter of fact.
So you've made your mind up that matters are serious enough for you to call this national inquiry. It's established in your mind, the Commission has agreed with you, it's now you've settled on the issue, and you don't raise it with the Minister of the day?
I'm not. I'd have to check our records. I don't recall...
Professor Triggs, this is a pretty significant issue, and one would think you'd have some independent recollection as to whether you consulted the relevant minister of the previous government in relation to yours and the Commission's decision. This goes to the very heart of this relationship with whoever the government is of the day, and I would be extremely concerned if you people had settled on such an important decision and you had not taken it up with the Minister of the day. And I imagine the Minister of today will be having a discussion with you out in the hallway this afternoon about what's in your mind now that you haven't shared.
Well, with respect, Senator, I think you're completely misunderstanding the process. I have no obligation to advise or consult the government about an inquiry at all. That's a totally independent matter for my discretion. So whether I did or did not is absolutely irrelevant.
No, but the question here is whether you did, and your inability to answer the question, Professor
Well,
Triggs.
because I talk to the Minister regularly, as I'm sure he will attest, quite regularly. And if I had, at that point in time, decided to hold an inquiry, I'm certain I would have advised him of that. But those are meetings at which minutes are not held. But I would certainly have evidence of my own minutes, so I can give you whatever I had. But I can assure you that with those regular meetings with the Minister, and there were at least two that I was dealing with at the time, but I met them regularly, and once any decision was made to hold an inquiry, I would have immediately told the Minister.
Let me close it out so I don't badger you, and I'll draw a line under the June, because I want to go back to February. You introduced February, not me. In June...
I don't believe I did, Senator, but we can go...
The Hansard will reflect that I did not invent February. It was your reference.
I said about that period. I don't think I'm being precise. I cannot. It was early in the year. Exactly when it was, I don't know, and I will have to check.
Well, then, do you stand by your testimony earlier that about 4 months into your term, you started to think about this inquiry?
A few months into my term, I was doing it, and I'd also then, I think, had my first visit to Christmas Island and conducted it.
My 4 months is more favourable to you than your few months, which I interpret as 3 months. Can you just...
Well, that's... look, I am saying to you that when I arrived and took up my job in August in 2012, we were aware of the continuing high numbers of children being held.
Yes.
It was a matter of great concern to me and my colleagues.
Yes.
It was suggested to me that maybe we should have an inquiry to coincide with the 2004
yes.
report. We had several discussions. Those discussions would have taken place within a few months, 2, 3, 4 months of my arriving, and went through into the middle of the following year as the numbers kept on rising.
So we've got from when the concerns are in your mind and your consulting colleagues, this needs to be done, you announce it 18 months later. Is that correct?
No.
Well, help me again. You said your appointment was in 2012. Within a few months, you were concerned about that. That puts me in November. You okay with that?
No.
Your few months?
No.
So what's your few months?
We discussed it between my arrival in August and around June. They were informal discussions as to whether this was about a wise use of resources, whether it was wise in light of government policy changing, whether we could add to the debate in a useful way, what evidence we could adduce and so on. These were all matters that we discussed in the Commission.
Okay, so let me just put a line under the June thing, if I might. I think we're agreed that by the June your mind had settled on the inquiry. Your colleagues will confirm, the Commission will confirm that you'd been talking about for 8 or 9 months and you'd settled on it. Yet you cannot recall whether you did or you did not have a conversation with a Labor minister indicating that you would commence an inquiry after the change of government or after the election. You can't remember. It's a simple question.
The answer is that I'm not answering the question. My discussions with the Minister are private.
Are you serious, Professor Triggs? I'm telling you now, this is a credibility issue. The Minister has advised me
that those conversations are private, and he's been very determined with all ministers are quite clear with me that when I discuss what we're doing, they're private.
Excuse me, point of order.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I respectfully point out to Senator O'Sullivan that his behaviour at the moment is verging on badgering a witness?
Well, I'm not sure that's a point of order, but I'm paying particular attention.
If you think that I'm pursuing, if that's code for firm pursuit of trying to clarify what's been a very untidy passage of evidence, then I'm guilty.
I don't think there's a point of order, Senator O'Sullivan.
So, is it your testimony, though, that you discussed it with the department by the June of 2013?
Around that time, it was discussed with the department. Usually, in my case, the secretary, but others within the Commission would have discussed it with other members of the department.
All right. That being the case, Professor Triggs, would you not have accepted then? I imagine that you didn't put a caveat of confidentiality on the department when you spoke to them about your decision?
Not to the department, no, but there is with the Minister.
Yeah, would you? No, I accept that. But would it not follow that after you've had discussions, and they were at a high level in the department?
I usually speak to the secretary.
Okay. You would assume, would you not, that the secretary would have then had a conversation with the Minister?
I don't make any assumptions of that kind.
Well, Senator, that might be an appropriate time. Mr Moriartis has been trying to attract my attention some time ago.
I've been following the discussion. Just for the sake of Hansard, the reference to the department is not to the Attorney General's department, it's to the Department of Immigration and Border Protection, so that's understood.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have clarified that. I would have thought that myself. Well, to be honest, Chair, until we get, I think, this body of material, so let's just ensure that we're on the track. Any personal file notes that you have in relation to this, to put it within a time frame, discussions that that have been minuted or recorded, any correspondence exchanges, internal or otherwise, between the commissioners, staff and commissioners, commissioners and staff. You will take on notice, can you, Commissioner, President, to provide them for the period commencing 1 July 2012 through to the date that the inquiry is called in the February of 2014?
I'd be very happy to provide whatever evidence we have.
That wasn't my question. It was communications that has any reference whatsoever to support your contention. No, well, no. Listen, this has been a difficult passage, and I don't want anyone to draw any inferences other than what they've seen and form their own views. It's been a difficult passage, and I'm not going to leave it to chance as to the description of what I want. This would be anything that would support your assertions in relation, particularly with respect to dates, and would include any correspondence between your commission and any government agency, not just the Department of Immigration or the Attorney General's, that has any reference whatsoever, even remotely, in pencil. I don't really care, so that we can establish now, after this litany of questioning, what date in your mind you formed a view to hold an inquiry at another time, we now know, February of 2014.
Senator O'Sullivan, can I just clarify, please? You've said correspondence or communications. Do you mean to include within that internal records of the Human Rights Commission, such as file notes,
yes,
minutes of
yes,
meetings, agenda,
yes,
internal memoranda?
Everything.
So not just a communications between the Commission and external entities or persons, but anything within the Commission as well?
Attorney, even a phone log where they phoned someone and put in it that I rang to talk about the inquiry. Every single.
So any relevant document.
Because I've got to say, Professor Triggs, that I entered into this, just wanting to clear up a point, and I've left personally, probably on some sort of a mission to get to the bottom of when, who, and why. Can you tell me now, and I don't care in what particular order, who, from your very first recollection of having a discussion with anybody, Fred, Mary, Jim, about your intentions to hold an inquiry, or your consideration of that?
But if anyone else...
When I arrived at the Commission, we were in the final, I think within days of my taking up my appointment, the former President had produced her report on the age of uncertainty. And one of my first tasks was really to sort of tidy up the remains of that process. And in the course of it, the question was, the numbers in detention appear to be rising over these very early months, the first 1, 2, 3, 4 months of my appointment. The numbers of children were rising, and maybe we should think about an inquiry. So I would say that the matter was under discussion within 3 or 4 months of my arriving.
Yes, but my question was nothing about that. You've already given testimony to that effect. I'm asking you for your first earliest memory, and then anyone you spoke to from that time forward about the idea in your mind.
The earliest memory is what I've just told you.
No, but who, Professor Triggs, who did you first talk to? And if not the first person, the second, the third, the fourth, your first memory of a conversation with someone about this inquiry. And where I'm going, Professor Triggs, is to the extent that this committee is able, I want to bring them along, and collectively, between yourself and these people you're about to refer to, we will tidy up this timing issue, which is to my mind now, a very significant issue of some national interest to determine when it is the Commission. Well, smile you may, but if you've made a decision by February, anyway, I'm not going to debate it. The names, Professor Triggs, of the people you spoke to?
I have no memory of who the first person is I would have spoken to about this.
Then your memory of the first person who you remember?
I think I would have spoken to the Executive Director. Possibly it came up through the Executive Director that this was a matter for discussion.
And the name of the Executive Director?
O'Sullivan, if you're almost finished this line, I'll let it go, but we are past afternoon tea break. As well, I'm required to ask if any other senator has a series of questions on the basis.
I'm happy to yield to the Chair on the arrangements, but I'll be invoking the new order of things and coming back to my line of questioning, Chair, today.
Well, do you have much longer?
I didn't think I'd be this long.
I can't restrict you. Well, just before we conclude, Professor Triggs, can I just clarify, I'm not asking you what the advice was, but did you give advice to the then Minister in early 2013 about a hearing into children in detention? I'm not asking what it was.
No.
So you didn't speak with the Minister about that?
No.
Or in 2012?
No.
Okay, thanks. Well, we might just leave that there and I'll come back to Senator O'Sullivan after the break.